Chapter 4, Identity Crisis. Not only did I get kicked out when I was 17 years old, or so I thought, but I had another life-challenging moment soon after graduation. One night, I went with one of my cousins to a drug deal that went bad. I no longer sold crack at the time, but I was still selling weed. I can't remember if the guy was my cousin's former cellmate or just a guy that was locked up in the same cell block. Anyway, the guy showed up to pick my cousin up, which to me was odd, but whatever. As my cousin is about to hop in the car, I noticed that there was someone else in the passenger seat of the car too. At that point, I'm thinking, I can't let cuz go solo, so I jumped in the car with him. The driver, who my cousin knew from jail, pulls off. I don't recall the exact time, but I do remember that it was dark. He made a right turn out of the apartment complex onto the main road. We stopped at the first light, and the passenger, who hasn't said a word the whole time, takes another pull from the blunt he fired up as soon as we got in the car. He took a long pause before blowing a big cloud of smoke up towards the roof of the small car we were riding in. He then reached over his shoulder to pass me the blunt. Of course, I rejected it. I may be a lot of things, but someone that shares a blunt with a person I don't know or didn't see roll beforehand is a non-negotiable. I looked at him and said, I'm good, but appreciate it. While thinking to myself, ain't no way. I don't know you and I ain't see you roll it. His response was, you sure? I nodded. He pointed the blunt toward my cousin, who gladly accepted. I gave my cousin a slight nudge with my right elbow and tried to tell him not to hit the blunt. I was thinking the driver saw me because when I looked up, I could have sworn he was looking right at me. He didn't say anything. He just kind of locked eyes with his partner in crime, who was trying his best not to look so obvious. My cousin is hitting the blunt so hard, he hasn't noticed a thing. By this time, we're making a right turn into another complex. We travel down a small hill and the driver parks the car. We all get out of the car and the third guy walks up out of what seemed to be nowhere. He tells me that only one of us can come inside, and that is the person doing the business. My cousin and I looked at one another. Then he said, it's cool, cuz. Don't trip. I'll be right back. At this point, I'm like, you sure, cuz? He loudly reassured me. Cuz, I'm good. Now I'm standing beside the car as my cousin walks downstairs with his friend from jail and the third random guy who just appeared out of nowhere. Oh yeah, the guy on the passenger side had gotten back in the car and was just sitting there with his door open. My gut was telling me that something was wrong, but my cuz said that he was good, so I stayed where I was. A few moments later, things took a turn for the worst. It was already as dark as when you close your eyes, and we were in some apartments that neither of us lived around. Then it happened. I found myself staring down the barrel of a loaded 12-gauge shotgun. Instantly, my life flashed before my eyes. For a couple of seconds, I couldn't even hear all the yelling and screaming the robbers was doing. It all happened so fast that there was no time even to reach for a weapon. We were then told to turn around and start walking around towards the woods in the back of the apartments. My cousin and I looked at each other. Right then, I could have sworn the guy with the 12-gauge pulled the trigger. In my opinion, it's only by the grace of God that the gun didn't go off, but we didn't give him another chance to pull the trigger again. So we both ran like our lives depend on it, because at that moment, it did. Then all of a sudden, just as fast as it had started, it was over. I was still alive, unharmed, and so was my cousin. Now that's what I call a miracle. That night, I realized that I was at a fork in the road and I had to really decide whether to continue down the path I was traveling or to make some major changes in my life. After all, I literally could have been killed. It took some time for me to get my head together after that, but one thing I knew for sure was that I had more learning to do, but I needed to figure out who I really was, fast. I didn't like me. I didn't want to be me. I felt broken and worthless. I felt abandoned and rejected by my biological father. I was even unsure of the identity of my biological father because he told me himself that I wasn't his son. I felt like Demont was a nobody. You see, Demont was timid and passive. Demont was bullied and pushed around. Demont wasn't as tough as his brothers. Demont wasn't cool like the other kids. He felt like he couldn't do much of anything right. He tried to play sports, but wasn't athletic enough. He tried to be a ladies' man, but couldn't keep track of what lie he told and which girl he told it to. He tried to be a gangster, but his heart was too big. He tried selling drugs, but cared too much about the drug addicts. He tried to be a goody two-shoe church boy, but wasn't holy enough, so he always felt like a hypocrite. All lies. I slowed my life down and started to focus on me more than my surroundings. I then noticed that the only thing that brought me comfort and happiness over the years was music. I remember the first time I heard a song by Tupac Shakur, my favorite rapper. In that song, he wasn't rapping about money, drugs, sex, or violence. Instead, he was actually telling young people that there was more to life than all of those things. He said you can be an accountant, not a dope dealer. Instead of out here pimping, you can be an attorney like Johnny Cochran. If you don't know who that is, he's the attorney that was famous for representing the former pro football player O.J. Simpson during his high-profile murder trial. After hearing those words from Tupac, I decided to try to write songs too. I now wanted to become a rapper. I also rediscovered my love for singing, so I started doing it more and writing R&B songs too. I knew I was not good at being a gangster or a ladies' man, so being a gangster rapper or R&B singer didn't fit me very well. The fact that I was raised in church and in the ghetto at the same time led me to rap and sing about that. I came up with the acronym GYNESIS, Genesis, which means God's youth need education, so I speak, and started a rap duo with my cousin Dante called Too Blessed. We would make music that I called Ghetto Gospel, which was another acronym that meant going hard every day trying to give our Savior praises out loud. Now, during this time, gospel rapping wasn't considered cool or popular, but neither was I. So it seemed a perfect fit for me. What I realized ended up blowing my mind. I discovered that people actually liked Genesis. He was respected and people thought he was cool. So I took pride in that name and identity. I felt like that name was valuable and significant. I even found out that girls liked him too. He was everything that I wished Demont could be. As Too Blessed, we were on our way to being what we considered successful. We were performing any and everywhere we could. Because of our hard work and determination, we ended up with a manager and also a sponsor who would give us clothes to wear at our performances. We even got the opportunity to open in concert for gospel music icon John P. Key, who is a highly decorated and notable gospel singer and pastor. What happened next would strike a devastating blow right to the heart of Too Blessed. One morning, I got a phone call from my cousin Eric stating that Dante was in the hospital because he had gotten into a car accident while fleeing from the police. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My cousin, best friend, and business partner, all in one, was in major trouble. I was in disbelief and denial. Most of the time, Dante and I went everywhere and did everything together. This time, I wasn't there, and I was furious with myself because of it. I was devastated because I felt like I had let my cousin and best friend down. I was not even thinking about the fact that I would have probably been in the same exact situation if I had been there. I don't know for sure if I could have even or would have even been able to do anything to change the outcome of that situation, but I felt guilty about not being there anyway. Dante ended up being sentenced to 10 years in prison after he got out of the hospital, and my heart was completely shattered into pieces. I was alone again, and our duo, Too Blessed, was dead. I couldn't do anything to help Dante get out of prison, but I wanted to seek revenge on the so-called friends I felt was responsible for putting him there. During a phone conversation with Dante one day, I talked about seeking revenge on those guys not caring one bit that I was on the recording line. I had it mapped out and was letting my cousin know that I had his back. However, my mind was blown again. Dante asked me to make him a promise that I didn't want to keep. He asked me not to retaliate on our former friends because he did not want me to be sharing a prison cell with him. He said that our family was hurting enough and that they did not need to lose me to prison too. Imagine that. Here my cousin was at the lowest point in his life and was still more concerned about others than himself. In that moment, I learned that you can let yourself down often and not think twice about it. It becomes a different story when you consider not letting others down. It was very difficult to say the least, but thanks be to God, I was able to keep that promise. It was one of the hardest promises I'd ever have to keep, but I wouldn't let him down. Discovery moment. It's hard being young and trying to find your place in this gigantic world, with so many different influencers and influences constantly battling for your attention. It is very possible to find yourself suffering from an identity crisis, especially when you come from a broken home or a dysfunctional family. Trying so hard to fit into a life you think you want could potentially lead you to losing yourself or your life completely. What are some problems that may cause a person to have an identity crisis? When was the last time you felt like you were struggling to find your identity? What are some ways that can help a person avoid an identity crisis? What are you going to do starting now to secure your